Hello, you're the Secretary General of the CNC and Aurélien Bigo, your researcher on energy transition and transportation, called upon by the CNC to prepare this action plan. The first question, who's it for? Either of you. Concretely, what does it mean to reduce the carbon footprint of movie theaters or the audiovisual sector? That's a vast project that has been open to us today. We consider that the audiovisual sector and the technical industries are just like what you see in other economic sectors. An activity with energy constraints, having an impact on the environment and generating global warming. And they must therefore, as the Ministry of Culture pointed out earlier, must play the same role as other economic activities in France, working towards the energy transition of the sector so that we can work towards a lower carbon footprint and carbon neutrality, as recalled by the Ministry of Culture earlier. The Paris Agreement of 2015 set the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. COP26 last November in Glasgow recalled that the goal was maintained. This is an ambition for the French government and also for all of Europe. And therefore, audiovisual, cinematographic, and technical industries will have to make a transition to support that movement. So this action plan that Roselyne Bachelot spoke about in her introduction, concretely, what do we find in it? What does it contain? Well, the action plan, as you said earlier, we worked on it in 2021 at CNC with 4 environmental experts, including Aurélien Bigo was in charge of transportation and mobility. We called on 3 other experts, Clarence Lacharne, Maximilien Fuhes, and Marie Kanaga. They all worked on the field of expertise, transportation for Aurélien, digital sobriety for Maxime and 3S. Clémence worked on resources and waste management, and Marie Carrega worked on production means. Through their recommendation, the proposals made helped us to define a public action plan that was presented last June of 2021 and presented again at the Cannes Festival to define a gradual policy to support the professional sector to CNC. The target is by 2022 to urge professionals to embark upon an energy transition. In 2023, defining new rules of the game. I'm thinking of a carbon calculator for works, and in 2023, aids or may be subject to certain obligations. There are things that will be applied in the coming weeks or not. The things that will apply as of now, we set up an observatory for the energy transition. We first need to know where we're starting from. Work was carried out with the project looking at all the aspects of reducing carbon in our sector. According to the study in 2021, they showed some impacts. We considered that producing a feature film, we're talking about 750 tons of carbon equivalent. But all of that is lacking. We need an observatory of the energy transition, which has been set up at the CNC since the end of 2021 to carry out surveys, carry out polls. We'll have the findings of the first carbon footprint of French movie theaters. We'll be working on a sample of about 15 movie theaters with a great diversity in terms of different buildings, so that we can say where we're starting from, what is the roadmap, and what are the means to attain the goal. The first step is to set up the observatory. The second step will be to support professionals in training. There are professional and trade union organizations that are proposing training as eco-managers for current professionals, and the CNC decided to work more on initial training. help working with students in the well-known schools. And as of next September, there'll be a training session for 60 schools each year for the next 4 years. What's interesting is that BNP Paribas is helping us with CNC at CNC. So this is a long-standing process. You spoke about the carbon footprint of our work. Has it increased over time or is it shrinking thanks to new technologies? Do we know? Well, that is the question. Do we know? We can't say what is the development, what are the changes in terms of carbon footprint. We don't have the tools to measure the carbon footprint for producing a movie. We'll talk about that in a few moments. Aurélien Bigo, you're one of the 4 researchers who helped to set up the CNC action plan. Did it surprise you that the audiovisual and cinema industry is thinking about this? Do you feel that it may be a separate sector, or did you have that feeling? Well, it's a sector that we don't normally see that way. The areas that we examine with respect to the energy transition are housing, transportation, industry, food, and agriculture. There are some sectors that are more cross-cutting, that are more closely examined as a full-fledged sector that also need to embark on this transition. So CNC coming on board is very interesting, and all sectors need to do this in general for us to attain the very ambitious goals we have set by 2050 or even before that. Your specialty is mobility. When we spoke before this, you said that it was one of the most important levers to be able to make the industry greener, reduce its carbon footprint. What are the solutions you could think of? Well, transportation, and we see this in producing works or in people's movement to go to a movie theater with a major impact in terms of the production of works or movies overall. So this is something we need to tackle quickly. There are 3 main levers that we can count on in the transportation sector. Like in all the other areas of the life cycle of cinematographic work, we have what we call avoid, shift, and improve. Avoid means how to restrict the number of miles covered so that we can reduce the environmental impact. Shift, that means shifting to lower emitting forms of transportation, less planes and cars, using active modes like bikes or traveling with others. And thirdly, improvement, limiting the environmental impact to other technologies or other energies to be used, going from using an electric vehicle instead of a traditional vehicle today. Do you have the feeling that the sector is aware of the work that remains to be done? I think it varies a lot. Some players are already on board, very much committed, forerunners, and there are others that may be aware but without acting so far. The goal is for all players to become committed through incentives by involving the entire sector. When you talk about the overall sector that goes from a movie goer, how they go to the movies, but it may be a festival around the world where people come from around the world for a festival. How can we restrict the carbon footprint for events such as those? Well, the 3 levers will apply to everything. Going to the movies for production or festivals. Going to the movies, we know that the first lever, limiting the number of miles covered, a movie theater where people that's closer to people would be in downtown areas. So that's the question. If new movie theaters are built, Most have already been built, of course, so we need to think about the other two levers. How can we see to it that people can come using more virtuous modes of transportation, or the number of parking areas for cars, or incentives for using bikes, or financial incentives for spectators, for viewers in movies, or partnerships with the city hall to have public transportation going to the movie theaters. And if we try to have more virtuous vehicles used, we can also try to provide for the possibility of charging electric vehicles. Such mechanisms so that users can be urged to go to the movie theater or festivals using virtuous means of transportation. These are the levers that can be used jointly to reduce the environmental impact. Do you have the feeling that these solutions apply to multiplex theaters or small theaters in the neighborhood? Well, all levers, but not to the same extent or constraints. But all of these levers may apply to all activities, after which, well, the big debate is there. We need to work on this to see what are the different levers that can be used and what room we have to maneuver, and what are the ambitions specific to the situation of each player. Leslie, coming back to you, how do you calculate the carbon footprint of a work? Well, today are no standards. You have operators on the market proposing modes of calculation and who will transform the cost of a movie into carbon equivalents. They will use expenditure made on this setting, on transportation, to say I will convert that into carbon equivalents so that we can measure the impact of a work on the environment. We have other ways of calculating this. A mix between the movie expenses and the reality of the costs for each production. Our goal in 2022 is precisely to have a mode of calculation that can be applied to everyone, common to all EU, if possible, because the EU has been conducting a project seeking to define a way of calculating the carbon footprint of a work. Of course, if movies are no longer made exclusively in France, but at European level, with respect to co-productions, we are working on defining a way of calculating the carbon footprint that could be imposed on all beneficiaries of public aid provided by CNC, and also for distributors who work with Arte, TF1, M6, France Télévisions, to define what must be taken into account and how. So we hope we'll have this tool ready by summer. How do producers react to that? Are producers afraid that their offers may be subject to compliance with certain standards? Yes, of course. But it would be incorrect to say that they fear it. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to embark upon this energy transition. Aurélien said this earlier. There are some operators who are already very motivated. We see impact movies that are very much present in the current movie industry. But you also have producers and directors imposing a certain number of rules of the game in terms of the means used, types of energy, wastes. And what are the outlooks? Setting a bonus for virtuous producers, a bad point? Well, that will lead to consultation with professionals in the sector, because it's not simple to set up operation in a system, creating a bonus and a malus system. And the goal is not to prevent creation and diversity. Yes, but the system is also made to improve the position of women. Yeah, but there shouldn't be a malus. Does that mean going in the other direction? Well, that will have to be discussed with professionals, and I believe that we must look at all the issues at stake and we'll see what is preferable. I put this question to Aurélien earlier, but in this sector or with the industry, do you think that everyone is aware that we no longer have a choice? We need this solution. Well, we just carried out a poll with professionals. We received almost 1,000 answers, and there's a strong awareness amongst professionals. But there are many questions as to how we can attain these goals, how we can support them or not, what's up to them or not. So more about questions as to how to do things. But in such a vast sector, there are some players that are very much motivated and others are less sensitive. Our job is to help them to realize that we can no longer move back. And over what time frame? Well, we're in the first phase of the action plan from 2022 to 2024. We'll implement everything we have announced, and we hope it will largely contribute to the energy transition of the sector and to help professionals in every respect. Some things are easy, waste management, for example. Other things are far more complex, such as investing in buildings and in movie theaters. One last question, Aurélia. Do you think that the audiovisual and movie industry is lagging behind on other sectors you've worked with?
Je dirais pas forcément.
It's quite difficult to say in advance. It's a recent constraint, at least for the sector, so there is not enough distance on that. But we are a little bit late in terms of transport. We are a little no. I mean, there is a certain delay in many fields, so it's understandable that there is a delay in the movie industry. We will have to accelerate if we want to catch up and to be on time with our climate objectives. But when we get out of the professionals and let's have a look at the consumers. I mean, the ones going to movie theaters. What has to be done? Do you have the feeling that it is on its way? The kind of soft mobility or things like that? Are we far away in the field of entertainment? Well, I think that the cinema could step in. I mean, if you look at the carbon CO2 assessment, I mean, transportation, etc., accounts for that CO2 print. Also within the cinema industries. There are some incentives, direct and indirect, so it has to be done in cooperation with local authorities and collectivities and town halls, etc. It has to be organized. Maybe a movie theater being isolated can't do everything by itself. Maybe then this theater should be supported, but we need to trigger off the virtuous kind of doing things. Whenever there is a commitment for a film that shows climate change commitment, etc., protection, global warming, then maybe there should be a kind of message as regards the public. There is this kind of citizen conscious. We all want to become more virtuous and limit the environmental impact. We have a question, remote question. How do you evaluate the CO2 print for film festivals? How do you assess that? Well, for the time being, we have no assessment because we don't have the tools. But as regards festivals, there are several ways of impacting that. Transportation, energy, because it's also very important to raise questions like, are we going to use a fuel, electricity producing device, or are we going to lean on a more modern and recent technology which is going to impact less, etc. Then we have the consumption, food consumption, food waste. We have a lot of festivals like the one in Biarritz last week, which committed on the elimination of plastic, reduction of meat, etc. So a lot of things can be done. Communication support also, but also the projection means what kind of projector do we choose. There are many elements that help us to reduce the impact of an event, whatever this event is. Thank you very much, Leslie Thomas and Aurélien Bigo, for your participation.